Okay, so hello everyone. Today I'm going to present an overview of some work that I've carried out in collaboration with a number of colleagues. Just all of the other names that you see on this first slide. So my name is Fahad Khan, and so I worked with my colleagues on exploring really a number of recent trends. Let me just get a number of recent trends with regards to the definition and use of models for linguistic linked data datasets. And here, when I talk about models, I'm using it as an umbrella term for what in other contexts are called semantic artifacts. And these are resources such as controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, and ontologies. Such models are obviously key for making linked data the resources as reusable and interoperable as possible, and for facilitating the publication of data sets in the spirit of the movement towards the semantic web. However, with the onset and subsequent popularity and even centrality of the FAIR principles in several disciplines, even more emphasis has been laid on such models, the use of such models. And this led a group of us, all of whom were participating in an EU cost action called Nexus Linguarum, and with various different backgrounds, to study these models and take into consideration various different points of view. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to present a very data-centric, language resource-centric centered perspective on this work. However, in our 60-page long article, we touch on a huge number of different topics. So obviously, I'm going to have to leave out a lot. But if you're interested in some of the topics that I mentioned here, please look into our article, read our article. So first of all, I want to hone in on the kinds of data sets which we're referring to, which we looked at in our work, and for which we would want to propose models in the first place. In fact, what we're really interested in here are linked data language resources. And by language resources here, I'm talking about what's described in the following quote. So language resources are a broad range of speech and language data types in machine-readable form, as well as tools and services for the processing of language data. Following a long-standing tradition, the term language resources also covers software tools for the preparation, collection, management, or use of other resources. So this quotation is taken from the website of Clarin, which is a European research infrastructure for language resources. However, note that in what follows, we will look exclusively at resources which fit into the data side of this definition and not at tools, although the provision of tools for creating, publishing, and accessing linguistic data resources is an important topic in its own right, and we also look at this in the article in some detail. So moving on from the more general category of language resources to looking at specific kinds of language resource, we have the following categories. So corpora and linguistic annotations, lexicon dictionaries, terminologies, thesauri, and knowledge bases, linguistic resource metadata, linguistic data categories, and finally typological databases. So these categories were originally proposed by the Open Linguistics Working Group of the Open Knowledge Foundation, and they're actually used to classify linguistic linked open data datasets on the Linguistic Linked Open Data Cloud. So in essence, then, what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is the extent to which pre-existing linked data models can help us to create linked data corpora, lexica, terminologies, linguistic resource metadata, etc., and all in the most fair way possible. So obviously, there are a whole range of different kinds of questions which you can ask here. For instance, what kind of gaps do there exist in these current models? Are there any biases towards European languages, such as English or French? And the answer is yes. Or are there biases for certain kinds of resources? Indeed, is it the case that certain kinds of resources lend themselves more easily to representation as linked data than others, and so on and so forth? So in the paper itself, we really tried to give a comprehensive account of the situation as it currently stands for such models. And we've also tried to contextualize this situation in terms of the broader picture regarding models and semantic artifacts in the semantic web. So let's go for a quick overview of the most prominent models in each of the different categories, which I've just mentioned. And we'll start with corpora annotations. So with standards for corpora for linguistic annotations and annotated corpora, the idea is really to facilitate interoperability among and between NLP web services and language resources. So among the most prominent such models, I can mention the NLP interchange format. It's also known as NIF, and this is a community standard which provides an RDF-based vocabulary for strings and their annotation. It's really been designed with NLP pipelines and web services in mind, and it's used in several different academic and industrial applications, and it's really been taken up by it's been taken up in particular by the DBpedia community. And another prominent vocabulary, which I can mention here, is the Conal RDF, which is actually a subset of NIF, which is designed for simplicity and interoperability with preload standards in NLP. Another quite well-known vocabulary, linked database vocabulary for corpora and annotations, is the web annotation format. Even though it's not mentioned here, it's actually probably one of the most prominent such vocabularies. So there are a number of challenges when it comes to the existence and use of these vocabularies. So there's ongoing work in order to support more complex annotations. And I guess one of the issues is that there's a lot of rival vocabularies for corpora and annotations, and most prominently NIF and the web annotation format. So there has been also moves towards harmonizing these standards and also harmonizing these LLD linked data standards with pre-LLD standards. And a lot of this work is actually taking place within a number of W3C community groups, including the Best Practices for Multilingual Linked Open Data W3C group and the Linked Data for Language Technology group. So next we're going to look at lexicons and dictionaries, and here we can cite what is arguably one of the biggest success stories of linguistic linked data, and that is the OntoLex-Lemon model. This was originally published in 2016 by the W3C OntoLex Lexica working group, community group, and this working group is also in charge of maintaining the OntoLex module and also publishing further extensions. So OntoLex Lexicon was originally intended as a model for enriching ontologies with linguistic information and not necessarily for modeling dictionaries and lexica per se. However, it soon became appropriated by the linguistic linked data community, and it became really a kind of de facto standard for modeling and publishing lexicons and dictionaries. So among the very many lexical resources which have been modeled using OntoLex-Lemon, I could cite the linguistic linked data version of the Princeton WordNet, as well as various other WordNets in other languages, DeepInary, which is the linked data version of Wiktionary, as well as the massive multilingual knowledge graph BabelNet. So OntoLex-Lemon, or also commonly known as OntoLex, has been used across a large number of projects at both at the national, regional, and both at the national and European levels. And I'm going to mention one of these projects in a few slides' time. And in fact, a lot of the development of OntoLex, as well as its various extensions, has been driven by project funding. And in particular, it's helped to ensure the participation in OntoLex-related activities of a large number of researchers, including numerous doctoral students and postdocs. So to go into a little bit more detail on the model itself, OntoLex-Lemon is modular, and it consists of a core module, along with modules, dedicated modules for syntax and semantics, decomposition, for instance, of multi-word expressions and compounds, a module for variation and translation information, as well as a dedicated metadata module. And here you can see the core module, and this has been heavily influenced. So the definition of this core module has been heavily influenced by previous modules and standards, such as the Lexical Markup Framework, LMF. And the W3C Ontology Lexicon group is now developing further extensions for OntoLex, and it has in fact already published a dedicated lexicography module. So I think, personally speaking, I think the popularity of OntoLex is due in large part to the fact that the translation of traditional print-based and web-based lexicons and dictionaries into graph-like structures is quite intuitive and tends to be reasonably straightforward. Indeed, the highly structured and moreover the highly regularly structured nature of lexicons and the information they contain seems to lend itself quite well to representation using the RDF data model without entailing the kind of verbosity which is often associated with RDF representations of annotated corpora. So as I said, the W3C group is a very active one, and it's open to everyone, and we have regular meetings, usually on a weekly basis. And in the last slide, I talked about the importance of projects for linked data vocabularies and models, such as OntoLex-Lexicon, but it's also important to mention the role of community groups, such as the W3C Ontology Lexicon group, in the development and also the popularity of modules such as OntoLex, models such as OntoLex, and especially for its role in ensuring the wider participation of the whole community and not just a limited number of experts, as happens with, for instance, ISO standards. So now let's move on to other categories. So I'm not really going to dwell too much on vocabularies for or models for terminologies, thesauri, and knowledge bases, since this topic will take us far beyond the domain of linked data language resources. But I'm guessing that most of you have already heard about SCOS, which is a W3C recommendation for encoding knowledge organization systems, and it's actually been hugely successful in this regard. And indeed, OntoLex was originally devised as a vocabulary for facilitating the addition of more structured linguistic information to ontologies and knowledge organization systems than was originally permitted by SCOS. And for anyone who's interested, there's a detailed discussion on the relationship between SCOS and OntoLex in our paper. And before moving on, I'd just like to mention that there's actually plans for an extension of OntoLex for terminologies and for converting terminologies and standards such as TBX into RDF. So in terms of linked data vocabularies and models more generally for linguistic resource metadata, so I can mention LIME, which is the dedicated metadata module of OntoLex, as well as the more extensive MetaShare ontology. And this latter model was originally developed as part of the MetaShare EU MetaShare project, and is currently undergoing further development in order to handle additional kinds of metadata. So together, these two models are able to cover a fairly broad range of use cases, although there's still quite a lot which they aren't able to capture. So this is a really ongoing work. So moving on to linked data linguistic categories, it's worth emphasizing that the availability of a comprehensive linked data category registry is really vital for ensuring interoperability between linguistic datasets. Moreover, such a registry should include contributions from experts from different areas of linguistics, and as well as specialists of different kinds of languages. And such a registry was indeed available just a few short years ago, and it was called ISOCAT. However, this wasn't an RDF native data category registry, and it also ended up being discontinued and stopped being maintained just a few years after its initial publication. However, fortunately, the classes and properties in ISOCAT were subsequently exported to Lexinfo, which is an RDF native data category registry, which is especially recommended for use with OntoLex. So so Lexinfo is currently maintained, and it's being extended via GitHub. However, my personal experience with Lexinfo would suggest the need for a more organized community effort towards extending as well as validating this resource. So finally, in terms of typological databases, while there have been a number of efforts towards the publication of such resources as linked data, there still isn't very much available at the moment to show for it. However, do see the paper itself for a discussion of these, detailed discussion of these previous efforts, and maybe also a hint as to why they failed. So even though I've only given you a very brief overview of the situation as it currently stands for linguistic linked data models, you can hopefully appreciate that there is a very pronounced kind of unevenness in the way that different kinds of resources are covered. This is motivated to a significant extent by the perception of many in the language resource community RDF as a suitable data framework for the categories of resources we've looked at. So, for instance, the impression is that it's too verbose for corpora and annotation, whereas I think the case for an RDF-based framework for publishing lexicons and dictionaries is much easier to make. And again, for corpora and lexicon, corpora and annotated corpora, the issue is also that there are two competing models, and this kind of leads to kind of maybe a little bit of unhealthy rivalry within the domain. So obviously there's a lot of discussion at the moment on the language resources in the age of large language models, and specifically of the usefulness of highly structured language resources for LLMs. So the question is really, what then can linguistic linked data offer? So obviously to start off with, by modeling, if you model and then subsequently publish your data as linked data, this gives you a great head start when it comes to making your data sets fair. In addition, the advantage of linked data over other structured data formats is really that it gives you a principled way of integrating together heterogeneous data, both linguistic and non-linguistic, on the basis of the semantics of this data. And the possibilities which come with being able to kind of link together all these different kinds of heterogeneous resources, data sets in a very systematic way, is something which is especially important, for instance, in the digital humanities. And in fact, the digital humanities have offered up some very promising use cases when it comes to linguistic data. And actually, I'm going to end this talk with by mentioning one of these projects. And this is the Lila linking Latin knowledge base. And so this is a multifarious collection of interoperable linguistic linked data resources of various different categories, from a number of the different categories which you looked at under the umbrella of language resources, all of them for Latin, and all of them represented using the same set of linguistic linked data models. So, for instance, tokens in textual resources and corpora and entries in lexical resources for Latin are linked together via a large collection of canonical forms of citation for Latin. And this is the Lemma Bank, the Lila Lemma Bank. And this Lemma Bank has been published, has been encoded using OntoLex-Lexicon. So there's a query interface to the Lemma Bank, which is available at the following link. There's also a Sparkle access point with some ready-to-use queries, which take into consideration various different resources, and the resources currently connected to Lila, including more than 50 million triples at the moment, can be perused at the last link on this slide. So, as I've said before, the article that this talk is based on is 60 pages long, and it features a lot of discussion of all of the issues that we've raised here, as well as many, many others. And I would invite everyone to participate in the W3C community groups mentioned previously. So if you're interested in any of these topics, as well as the Nexus Linguarum cost action, where we're actually coordinating a lot of the work that's being carried out on these models, the models that I mentioned before. So in terms of industry involvement, so far, most of the interest in linked data approaches to language resources has been from dictionary publishing houses. However, this might change now with the onset of the European language data space. Fingers crossed for that. So with that, I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything I could answer. If not, if there's anything that you found interesting, or that you want to learn more about, please email me at the address on the slide. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. Okay. Don't see any questions in the chat. We can wait a couple of minutes, but I think there's just 8 people here. So. Okay. So I think, yeah, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. Let's see. Thank you, Kenneth. I'll just. Okay, so we don't have any questions. So it just remains for me to thank everyone for participating in this talk, for participating in this event, and have a great rest of conference.